Welcome back, brothers and sisters. I am Braden. This guy right next to me is Tim, and this is The Second Legacy, and thank you for stopping by. Today, we got to talk about something on a little more serious note. We had, I'm sure you guys have heard, an ATF raid that went bad, ended up in the unfortunate conclusion of a civilian was killed in exchange of gunfire during a 6 a.m. raid, all around a warrant that we're going to break all of this down. There's a lot of things to look at here. But make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn the notification bell on. But with that, Tim, this is an interesting one. There's a lot of folds to this one, isn't there?
There is, because when this news story first broke, of course, the ATF was silent, like they didn't want to say anything publicly, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a little bit odd when they don't share information around why they were even conducting the raid. And then you have the fact that this is an upstanding citizen with no criminal record, no criminal history, very well respected in the business community, promotions, no known enemies, just living in a nice community.
No criminal history either.
But I said that I think the guy has no criminal history, none.
Yeah.
Right. And so why in the world, what justification would the ATF have to do a 6 a.m. raid, rolling up with a SWAT team on a businessman's house? For what?
Right.
What were they looking for? Why were they there? Why do they roll in so heavy with armor and all this other stuff? Why are they doing this? What was the justification? That's my question. Right.
Well, that was the original, right?
Yeah.
So when this was breaking earlier yesterday, when we were having a lot of videos fly around it, without the information provided, you kind of get to a perspective where it's, okay, what were you doing and what did you expect that you rolled that heavy? And that was my first question, exactly what you just said. Why are you rolling this heavy on something that is warrant related?
Right.
Like, is this person a known felon, a gangbanger, a criminal? Nope, none of those things.
History of violence.
Does this person have a history? Right. Nope, none of those things.
Restraining orders, none.
So why are you rolling so hard? Right. Like there is no history or evidence of this, right? So, or to support this rather. Again, and you do 6 a.m. raids because you're scared that someone's going to have a real bad scenario and you're hoping that 6 a.m. they're not ready to defend themselves or do anything stupid, right? So none of this leading into it pointed to this, right? And then later in the story, you hear that, well, the fire department was there with materials that cut metal and pry bars. Okay, well, that's obvious. They're going for a gun safe. I mean, that's exactly what that was, right? Mm-hmm. But again, the main question remains, why roll this heavy? Well, we've got some more information now that the warrant has been released, but this guy died.
Yep, he was shot in the head.
I mean,
yeah. Of course, ATF claimed he fired first, but they also claimed Koresh fired first at Waco. But then somehow the front door went missing, which would have proved who fired first. So the ATF doesn't exactly have a strong history of telling the truth in such matters. Call me a conspiracy theorist.
Well, right. But I think that's an important part of the conversation because you're not really going to know in the short term what truly happened from a standpoint of investigative outcomes, right? Like who actually fired first? Were there an exchange of gunfire or was there an assumption of gunfire and the ATF fired first? Like that's going to come out in time.
Beyond all that, right? So I'm a law-abiding gun owner myself. I have no reason to think I'm going to get raided. None, right? So I'm not expecting police to show up at my house at 6 a.m. I suspect that the police have a question for me related around my gun ownership or something I may have done. I don't know. It's something that they want to talk to me about. I would assume they would come and knock on my door wearing a uniform and saying, hey, we have a few questions. Do you mind answering them? What I don't expect.
Like the videos we've seen, right? Right. Like the videos we've seen last 2 years.
Yeah. Right. Like, hey, we have a report of this and we just want to ask you a few questions type of thing. What I don't expect is my front door to get kicked in at 6 a.m. So I'm sound asleep and I hear this ruckus, lights, doors getting kicked in, people shouting, people go, well, they announced. Well, I've heard announcements in other videos where it's just like, you get on the ground, you have no idea what's being said. And I also know that people that raid drug houses and criminals oftentimes pretend to be police officers, dress as police officers, and kick in doors and assume that you're not going to defend yourself because you're going to think, briefly at least, giving them the advantage that they're police officers. So it's not unreasonable for somebody woken from slumber, having their front door bashed in, would respond with a firearm in hand. protecting themselves and their
Correct.
family. That's the problem
But
I
I
have
think
with no-knock warrants. And that's the problem I have with
I
these
think
raids.
that's where we come. I think that's where if I am looking objectively at what we're looking at right here, that's exactly where my first initial problem is, without looking at the warrant details, which we're going to get into. But my first problem is, why did you take it to the level of extremity like that? Why did you not try arresting them when they're out of their home, or talking to them when they're out of their home? Why did you have to go from 0 to 100, which then sets the table for a negative reaction?
And the crime,
that's the problem.
The crime they had a warrant for must have been so egregious that they had no choice but to roll in at 6 a.m. with SWAT, guns ablazing, because he must have done something just so. He must have stood accused of something that was just so bad that they needed to take every defensive measure possible. Right? That's the only thing I can conclude, right?
About that, Tim. See, now that's what the outsider would say. The everyday normal person would say, well, I mean, there's obviously a reason. Yeah, that reason doesn't really seem to justify it, because in the warrant release, it was because he was selling guns without a license. That's what they accused him of.
Wow.
Selling guns without a license.
That is awful. So he was a known gun collector. All of his friends knew he was a gun collector. He was a law-abiding citizen. But didn't ATF just recently write a new rule around, if you sell a gun for profit, they're going to consider you a gun dealer? Correct. So if I go out and I buy a Glock 19 and I decide, well, you know what? I don't really want a polymer frame striker fired pistol. I'm going to switch that out for a CZ75. And I sell that Glock to a friend of mine and I make $1 profit.
You're a dealer.
I'm now a dealer in the eyes of the ATF, and apparently I can get my door kicked in at 6 a.m. and my entire family threatened with guns and my face shot off.
That's the point. That's the point right there. Right. You just nailed it. Because of a change in law that was done. By the way,
rule.
John, no. This was hold on. This is an important distinction. It was a rule based off of a new law. Right. Because this is the Safer Communities Act, right? They put this out there through John Cornyn, Chris Murphy, Kyrsten Sinema. All the 15 Republicans signed it into law. Yeah,
and then ATF wrote the rule. Yes.
Correct. Then ATF used that as an impetus to write the rule. That's the problem. The Republicans saying we just need something common sense, bipartisan something, enabled the groundwork for the ATF to make all these new rules and have all this new enforcement power. They redefined what is selling a gun as a gun dealer. And this right here is what you're talking about. And I know that this is an extreme case and this is not every single instance, but the whole point is, when you give the government carte blanche power to do something like this, they may not always do it, but they have the potential availability to do it. That's the problem.
But these types of raids are becoming more and more common. They're politically motivated. You see people charged with political crimes, like, campaign finance crimes. And look what they did to Roger Stone. They did the same thing to him. Right? This guy isn't a threat.
I think that was a 5 or 6 a.m. raid as well.
He's not a threat to anybody. He's more of a threat to himself, just being a bumbling old dude that's, a little bit off his rocker. But they did it to him. So this is becoming more and more commonplace. We're seeing the feds, all the law enforcement branches, FBI, DEA, ATF, all of them, IRS, doing these no-knock raids. Something I think needs to be done to stop these no-knock raids. They should only be authorized under extreme circumstances, when law enforcement can prove to a judge beyond a reasonable doubt that this person is a true threat to law enforcement.
Correct. No,
rolling up on businessmen at 6 a.m. is complete nonsense, and it sets the stage for this type of violence. But they're going to justify it because he was a gun collector and guns are bad and he's an evil person.
Well, right. So now here's getting into the actual nuts and bolts a little bit. This is what they were accusing of, and listen to the time frames here. And I'm jumping around, doctor, so just bear with me. But this is number 11. Investigators alleged in the document, this is the warrant that was released, that Malinowski bought more than 150 guns from May of 2021 to February 27th. I'm assuming that that's February 27th of 2024. So that's a 3.5-year period, almost 4-year period, to doing 150 guns. So that's what they bought more than those. And then he sold guns, including at gun shows. So that's the first part of what they're accusing. So right out the gate, being a gun aficionado, That's what that says. 150 guns over a 3.5 year period to someone who really loves guns and then sells them to recoup the money and then buy more guns. That's not outside the realm of possibility.
No, I mean,
Now,
having been in gun stores my entire adult life, there are lots of gun collectors that would buy 150 guns in a 5-10 year period, right?
correct.
And I remember when Mosin Nagants were like 50, 60 bucks each, and people were buying them literally by the case in big wooden crates. And they're trying to collect every imaginable different variation of the Mosin Nagant. And so,
Correct. I remember
you
that.
remember that?
Wasn't there
But the same thing as
wasn't there there was a different variant. There was like a hex version,
Yeah.
and then there was certain serials,
yeah,
right?
different serial numbers, different receiver types, different barrel types,
Mhm.
and so people were trying to collect every possible variant. So they were so affordable, they were just buying them in bulk, and then the ones they didn't need that were redundant, they would just sell, right?
Correct. Like the crates. They had the crates
Right.
of like 50 of them.
Exactly. And so this big number of 150 is going to shock some folks, but if you walk in the collector's world, that's 150 guns over a 3-4 year period is not a whole lot, especially if you're talking about things like Mosin Nagants and other surplus type
If you
firearms.
are a
Or
collector.
if you're a collector,
Right.
it's just what you do. You collect certain things. You go, like, I've looked at this and I'm like, wow, man, I actually wound up with 3 of this same type of AR-15. Maybe I should turn this into something else that I want versus having 3 of the same.
Correct.
And so what I do is I very rarely sell to an individual. I'll just trade it into my own gun store, to a gun store I've done business with, get credit for whatever it is I want, right? But not everybody does that. A lot of people just want to flip it to
Correct.
cash, but they've made that now a crime. Selling your personal property.
Correct.
So if you bought a Hellcat before the gasoline engine ban, and you bought it for, I don't know, 60,000, whatever they go for, you bought it for 60,000, but 2 years later you sold it for 80,000 because people now can't get them. Are you now a car dealer?
Correct.
Are you dealing in cars without a
That's
license?
exactly right. That's a perfect example. Now, here's where they're going to point to. Now, this next part, like those are excellent examples, and I think that's a very good point. Here's where they'll go. 6 guns were later recovered in the commission of a crime, and undercover ATF agents bought 3 others at gun shows. The document says, "Oh, so we've got ATF agents in gun shows now."
Oh, yeah.
Okay. One of
I've
the
seen
guns cited in the affidavit was found on a 15-year-old Norteño gang member in California in 2022. So a 15-year-old who is underage has a gun and he's a gang member, and that's his fault?
Yeah. Right.
I'm failing to see how. See, and this is where it gets. And I guess this thought just came to me, Tim, and let me bounce this off you. Why aren't they just going after straw purchasing? Because if that's what they're describing here. If they're describing 6 guns were later found in the commissions of crime, and they found them on gang members and all that, that's straw purchasing and trafficking. That's not selling guns and becoming a dealer. Do you know there is a distinction difference there?
Yeah.
And it's just like this. It feels like it was extremely sloppily done. The execution was extremely overbearing, and it sets the table for very bad things.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like to me.
And trust me when I say the police knew this guy inside and out. ATF obviously had been watching him. If they're buying guns from him at gun shows, they've been trailing him for months, if not longer, right?
Well, it says right here, 2021, and they knew something from that same person in 2022.
So for years.
That's 3 years.
Right. So ATF has been following this guy. So they know what time he leaves the house, whether he leaves the house most likely with a gun in hand or not, or does he just go get in his car in a business suit and go to the airport where he worked? So they knew his behavior. They knew where he went from day to day, what his routines were. And my point in all this is that they didn't need a SWAT team at 6 a.m. They could have picked him up at the airport and nothing would have happened. They would have just taken him into custody.
Correct.
And charged him with whatever BS rule they wanted to charge him with. So there was no need for this. And I guarantee you, ATF wasn't surprised by any of this. They're going to play like, well, this guy could have been a violent felon. We just don't know. BS. You followed him for years. You knew exactly where he worked. You knew exactly his history.
You knew what he did, where he did.
Right. And
you knew all of it.
You knew he wasn't a criminal other than he was dealing in guns. You could have just picked him up at the supermarket or picked him up at the airport or just picked him up anywhere other than kicking his door in at 6 a.m. That's my problem.
Well, so now listen to this. I find this fascinating as we end this out. This is such interesting details. This is number 13. Malinowski would order guns online. This is from the actual affidavit that the ATF agent wrote. Malinowski would order guns online, including AR-style pistols, have them shipped to a business. I know, have them shipped to a business, and it's redacted in the affidavit, and pick them up there. The ATF agent wrote in the court document. Okay, that's perfectly legal. There's nothing wrong with that. Malinowski filled out ATF form 4473. They messed that up. 4473, which warns that a gun can't be for someone else, and that the quote repetitive purchase of firearms in order to sell them for a profit without a license is illegal. Before that business transferred the guns to him, the affidavit alleges. So what they're saying here is they are trying to paint the picture that he's buying all of these guns and filling out the proper 4473s, and then he's trying to sell them for profit when this guy was already wealthy.
Right.
And again, they've redefined the term of profit. It's now $1.
They haven't told us how many guns he sold and what the profit was. If this big criminal enterprise,
they're alleging 100. Yeah, they bought 150, but they didn't say how many was sold.
Right.
You are correct.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, they're throwing out these big numbers and talking in circles here, but what they've not said is he sold this many guns. So of the 150 we know that he purchased over the course of the last 3 or 4 years, he sold 150 guns, all for profit.
Correct.
Okay, but let's assume that that's the case. Let's assume that he did do that. Do you still kick in his door at 6 a.m., threaten his entire family, and start a gunfight? Or do you just pick the guy up at work?
That's the point.
You've been following him for years.
That's the point, right?
He hasn't hurt anybody in the years you've been following him. He's displayed no violent tendencies. Otherwise, you would have arrested him for displaying those violent tendencies. So what are you doing here?
Right. It smacks of, this is the worst case scenario where it smacks of overbearing government, overbearing executive bureaucracy, which then makes an overbearing decision to crash and raid a house at 6 a.m. Again, like you said, there is no evidence whatsoever that there was any inclination towards violence. And what they're going to say is, well, he fired back. Well, you bashed his door in at 6 a.m. Right. Like,
this isn't the first time.
To your point.
And police departments have been held liable for this type of stuff in the past in the courts.
Correct. They have. And it all comes down to, this is not over. This is going to be a long trending thing, because this needs to be addressed. Like, you better have a damn solid case to say this has got to happen, and they need to change. The rules need to change. This right here could happen to any one individual, male, female, across the country, because all of the things that we're seeing here are mundane. They are not there is no drug smuggling. There is no drug use. There is no gang affiliation. There is no criminal exercise. There's no criminal history. Nothing indicates that this person was violent.
Right.
Nothing.
But this is a trend in the federal government. It's also a trend in some larger cities. So you have a federal government that spends, millions upon millions of dollars training a SWAT team to execute warrants. You have, it all started in LA with the whole term SWAT, and special weapons and tactics were developed for the most violent of felons, because the average uniformed police officer wasn't equipped properly to deal with the most violent of felons. Right. So they created the SWAT team to deal with those very specific problems for law enforcement, where you're dealing with extremely violent criminals that have extremely violent criminal pasts, that are known to be armed, are known to want to shoot it out with police or whatever. That's what you reserve SWAT for. But because they spend all this money in all these different departments and agencies spinning up these militaristic branches, well, what's going to happen when they sit around and don't do nothing? You got to justify your existence. So you start rolling them out for mundane warrants, right? So this guy hasn't paid 12 parking tickets. Call up SWAT. Let's go get this guy. You got to justify your existence. Otherwise, you get your budget yanked. That's how this happens.
You are completely correct. You are completely correct.
It needs to be stopped.
Just, it does. It honestly, it needs to be reeled back in a big way, because you're starting to see, and you have been seeing, but you're starting to see specific instances pop beyond where they need to be popping to. It's just, the thing is, and this is what's so fascinating as we wrap this, Tim, because this is a long conversation, but you got the right who is going to be outraged that this would happen to Malinowski, right? You effectively, on the political right, the gun side of things, you're going to be outraged at this. Then the left, 2-3 years ago, is going to be outraged by Breonna Taylor. You're talking about the same root cause.
Yep.
Like it's the same root issue. One, they are different people, they're different criminals, they're different elements, they're different people, not guilty, all these different things. But the base level understanding is these are accelerating an instance to give the propensity for a violent reaction. In both cases, the left and the right are both outraged about the same root cause, just different outcomes.
Yep, absolutely. But that is the hypocrisy of modern politics in the United States, you know? And it's funny you brought up the Breonna Taylor story. Well, it's not funny. It applies. But the left will say, look what police did, bad police. But they won't say anything about this case, right? But like you said,
that speaks to my point.
It's the exact same problem we're talking about here, where there's excessive use of force. You know, in her case, the claim is, I think it's still being litigated, but the claim has been that the police fired blindly through a door, blindly through a window with the drapes pulled, and that's how she was hit,
right,
shooting at her boyfriend, right? And so, and then you have this story. So yes, the left and right are going to pick their battles, but as you said, they converge, and it's the exact same problem that we're dealing with here. So anyway, let us know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think no-knock warrants should be something that is reserved for the most special of cases, done away with completely? What do you think about them? Let us know in the comments down below. Thank you for watching Second Legacy, and we'll talk to you guys soon.